Hello, everybody, and welcome back. We are looking at the top 8 of EUIC VGC, the Video Game Championship Series. And today, it's not all going to be in one video, it's going to be in 4 videos. But today, we are looking at every single one of the Masters top 8 games in 4 separate videos, so keep an eye out. This first one is up against 2 people we've already seen on stream that have been pretty darn successful. They're pretty big names in the VGC community, in Taran Birdee and Joseph Ugarte. We have seen both players win some pretty cool matches on stream. They both have some spice to bring for the teams. Joseph specifically, as you can already see if you're looking at that Volcarona, has some fun stuff here. Taran, for the most part, has a pretty standard Miraidon team, although notably Ogerpon Hearthflame with the Woodhammer here is the method of choice for the Ogerpon. Everything else is really standard. It is a Rapid Strike Urshifu with that taunt over close combat, as well as Mystic Water. But Whimsicott here is Covert Cloak and Terra Dark. A lot of Whimsicotts we have seen are Focus Sash, and so this Covert Cloak is pretty effective. It means that you can guarantee that one of Tailwind or Light Screen essentially goes up, and then if someone clicks Fake Out, you can just Encore them, and you feel pretty good as the Whimsicott here. Taran's Miraidon is also, I believe, a little bit on the slower side. It's not max speed. We saw that be pretty advantageous in Taran's previous matches. Fergraph with very standard Trick Room, Helping Hand, Psychic, Foul Play with the Electric Seed. Iron Hands, it's a second restricted. It is Terra Water here instead of any other Terrestrialization. And this is all around a very standard Miraidon team that we've seen a lot of, but Taran has been able to pilot it to a really successful top 8 finish so far. I wouldn't be surprised if we see Taran try to go for the faster mode up against Joseph's team, but again, one of the big things about this team is that if you go for Tailwind in games 1 and game 2, you can go for that Trick Room in game number 3 and really change those speeds up and keep your opponent on the back foot and keep them guessing. For Joseph here, Joseph also has a relatively standard Miraidon team. Instead of the Whimsicott, has Grimmsnarl as more of that supportive Pokemon with Foul Play, Thunderwave, Light Screen, and Reflect. It is Terra Ghost, so it can't get hit with Fake Out, and it does have that Light Clay. Setting up those screens for 8 turns can be super powerful. Urshifu Rapid Strike for Joe is Mystic Water with Close Combat and Swords Dance, really focused on getting some of that extra damage in, and it's Terra Poison, a little bit more defensive here. Iron Hands notably has Drain Punch, Wild Charge, and Volt Switch, and then we're off this screen really quick, but there was a Ditto and a Volcarona. Volcarona is a little bit more supportive. It has some redirection for Joseph, an additional supportive option, but Volcarona can also dish out a decent amount of damage, and it has Flame Body, which can burn Iron Hands on the other side, or Urshifu's as well. Coming into game 1 here, Taran is leading with the Miraidon and the Iron Hands, and Joseph is leading with an Iron Hands of his own in the Grimmsnarl. This is a great spot for the Grimmsnarl to set up a potential light screen here. We could see a Terrestrialization potentially from the Grimmsnarl if it does not want to take a Drain Punch, although I'm not sure you're too worried about that if you're Joseph here. Light Screen or Reflect, either one is pretty good. Or also, Grimmsnarl could go for Terra Ghost if it doesn't want to get hit by Fake Out, notably. But I'm interested to see, again, a lot of these, mirror matches between similar Pokemon come down to speed ties, or even having similar speed tiers and who is going to be moving first, what the training is. And these Iron Hands, whoever can click Fake Out first is going to be pretty big. We see the Miraidon Terrestrialize. Go ahead, it's into that Terra Fairy. This is a pretty big sign that's going to be clicking Dazzling Gleam, which neither of these 2 Pokemon that Joseph has wants to deal with it. But we see the Fake Out from Joseph's Iron Hands, which does move first, and we see the Reflect come out of the Grimmsnarl here. Since the Fake Out's going into the Miraidon, you click Reflect for the Grimmsnarl to guarantee that the Iron Hands is going to be doing less damage, and it does a good chunk into Joe's Iron Hands with that low kick. But the Drain Punch can still come out. And so since we saw the Fake Out from Joseph's Iron Hands, we don't actually know which Iron Hands is faster yet. Neither do the players, although they potentially might. They might know spreads. They might know what outspeeds. They're good at resource collection. Now, though, Grimmsnarl has the opportunity to also set up Light Screen, and those screens are probably going to be up for the rest of the game. 8 turns is a long time in VGC. We'll see if that changes, though. Light Screen comes out, so Joe now has the opportunity to go for a bit more damage with the Iron Hands, but the Miraidon goes for Volt Switch here, does a ton into the Grimmsnarl, even through the Light Screen there, but Grimmsnarl manages to stay up, stay alive, and stay on the field. We do get a glimpse into Taran's back, too. It is Ogerpon, and it is that Whimsicott. So Taran opting for, if there is going to be any speed control on the field, it is going to be trying to outspeed Joseph's team. Joseph notably does not have any real awesome speed control. The main thing is going to be Thunder Wave on the Grimmsnarl. And we see Wild Charge going to the Whimsicott. Does quite a bit, even though it's not super effective. And the recoil might actually put Iron Hands in range of low kick, but Taran just goes to the Drain Punch into the Grimmsnarl and takes it down. Honestly, if you're Joseph, I don't know if you mind that too much. You wouldn't mind maybe getting foul plays into Taran's Iron Hands, but getting the Grimmsnarl to fall after you set up both screens. You don't have any Thunder Waves up, but that's kind of whatever. And now just gets to bring in Miraidon really, really safely here. This Pokemon isn't going to be taking too much damage from anything that Taran has. Now, with no Terrasilizations, this does give Joseph the opportunity to Terra Fairy the Miraidon so he can resist any potential fighting type moves coming into it, or a Moonblast from the Whimsicott, and then start clicking Dazzling Gleams. Right now, Joseph has the damage advantage, is probably the best way to put it, because Light Screen and they have very, very similar teams overall. Whimsicott does have the opportunity to set up Light Screen, which could be pretty big, but goes for the Tailwind instead. Taran valuing the speed control more than the damage control. We see Miraidon still is the fastest thing on the field, though. It goes for a Volt Switch of its own and knocks out the Whimsicott. Both players are down one Pokemon. I'm interested to see what Joseph's fourth Pokemon is. We already know that Taran has the Ogerpon here. I'm interested to see, now that this Miraidon is switching out, do you bring in the Ogerpon or do you go ahead and bring in your own Miraidon? But we see the Volcarona here for Joseph. Low kick is going into that spot and it does very, very little damage. We do see that this is a bulkier Volcarona. We see Drain Punch come out of the Iron Hands. That's going to heal it up above potential low kick KO threshold. And now if you're Joseph, I think you're in a pretty good spot here. You don't mind Volcarona being on the field here next to Iron Hands. You can redirect. You have some other supportive moves with that Volcarona, and you have some damaging options that neither Ogerpon or Miraidon really want to take right now. They don't take super effective damage from any of the fire type moves coming in, but they also don't really want to deal with it since they're not super bulky and there is no light screen setup. Volcarona with the Citrus Berry as well can probably take one or two more attacks from either of these Pokemon, and then with that Citrus Berry be able to heal up so that it doesn't have to go down on this turn. And so if you're Joseph, you have the opportunity to just keep laying waste with your own Iron Hands here, and Taran is not going to be able to dish out quite as much damage. Now, this Miraidon with Choice Specs can still do a lot. Light Screens just kind of eliminates the Choice Specs damage, thereabouts. I don't know if the math is, I don't think the math is the exact same. So it's still going to be doing a lot, just not nearly as much as it was. Electric Terrain is also going to be falling here pretty quickly, and we see Volcarona go for the Protect. Joseph making the call that Taran is valuing taking out this Volcarona, trying to get as much damage into the bug as Taran can. So I'm interested to see. Okay, so Iron Hands goes. I think we're just going to see Drain Punch trades here, which I believe is going to favor Joseph overall. But this would be pretty funny if this is the way things go. It is going to be Wild Charge into the Miraidon, though, and Miraidon is going down. Joseph now up 2 Pokemon as well as the single restricted. So Iron Hands and Ogerpon is what is left for Taran here, but Joseph's Iron Hands has taken quite a bit of recoil damage, and Taran is going to be able to move first with both of his Pokemon here, I would imagine. Volcarona is pretty speedy, but again, when you have a bulkier Pokemon, usually that's going to be a little bit slower. You're going to value more of the defensive stats as well as some offense instead of the speed. And with that Tailwind still up for, I believe, another turn or two. I didn't quite get to see on that screen there. Taran looked at it real quick. This Iron Hands is not in a good spot. Simple as that. It can go for a Drain Punch. It can go for a Wild Charge. We do see the Ivy Cudgel come out first, and Volcarona doesn't go for any redirection moves. Volcarona takes only a little bit, but notably Volcarona does not go below half, so Citrus Berry does not trigger, and Taran with a low kick takes out Joe's Iron Hands. Quiver Dance comes through. This is going to bulk up the Volcarona. It's going to be able to get out a lot more damage now. But notably, that special defense boost doesn't feel as good. I believe Tailwind is going to peter out here in the next turn or two. Yes, it's going to be the next turn. And we see the Electric Terrain fade. So Iron Hands a little bit less powerful here on top of the Reflect already being out for Joseph, but the Electric Terrain now is coming back up. Honestly, if you're Joseph, that feels, I don't know, does that feel a little rough to reset the Electric Terrain and boost up that Iron Hands a little bit more? I am uncertain. Now, Joseph still has not Terrastalized here. You could go for Terra Fairy on the Miraidon, although I'm not certain that you need it. You could go for Terrastalization, a more defensive Terrastalization on the Volcarona if you need to. But with Miraidon, since there's no longer any super effective damage that's going into you, and you don't necessarily want to open yourself up to a super effective Heavy Slam from the Iron Hands, you might not want to go for that Terra Fairy. We also might see a game where Joseph just doesn't Terrastalize. We've seen a couple of those where Terrastalizing, well, we've seen some games where players haven't Terrastalized. They've often lost that. But we see Joseph go for the Terra Fairy here again. That's a really good sign that we're going to see a Dazzling Gleam, but not guaranteed, obviously. I am interested to see what this Volcarona goes for here. It is Ivy Cudgel into that Volcarona slot again, and that is a critical hit. I think that critical hit absolutely matters first off, but if that critical hit came in the turn previously, I believe that the Citrus Berry is able to heal up that Volcarona without too much of an issue. Iron Hands is also able to just barely survive a Dazzling Gleam here, gets a little bit more damage onto the Miraidon. The Tailwind does now fall, which could be big, but even though this Light Screen and Reflect are still up, with Iron Hands alive for Taran, this game is not over yet. So, Miraidon is the last Pokemon standing for Joseph here. I don't think it's going to be able to deal with both of these Pokemon at the same time. Ogerpon is able to dish out a ton of damage with Ivy Cudgel, and it has a pretty high crit chance here. That's one of those ways that you can get around Reflect and Light Screen. A pretty nifty game design mechanic, if I do say so myself. And so Miraidon has some problems here. It cannot go for another move. It has to click Dazzling Gleam. That is, like, there's literally no other option. So any redirection here isn't going to do anything. And so Taran is... the most effective play is to just go for all-out damage. Iron Hands is going down. It's going to come down to a little bit of a race between Ivy Cudgel and Dazzling Gleam here. But honestly, with this being a Terra Fairy Miraidon, I think this Ivy Cudgel is going to be able to do it. Yeah, Miraidon is not going to be able to resist, doesn't have the resistance of that Dragon type anymore. And we see the Spiky Shield come out from Taran as well, just to really make sure and try to fade out this electric terrain if possible. Yeah, Ogerpon gets to protect itself. I'm interested to see, and the Reflect wears off. Light Screen's going to wear off next turn, but with the Reflect going off, that will guarantee that the Miraidon goes down, but I'm pretty sure on the previous turn that the math would work in Taran's favor anyways. So Dazzling Gleam comes through. Taran goes for the slightly more powerful Wood Hammer, though. We saw that button get pressed. And Taran just barely able to survive that single target Dazzling Gleam. Wood Hammer comes through. Miraidon is going down, and even though there's recoil damage, Taran gets the game #1 win. It got really dicey there for a second. That critical hit onto the Volcarona was really big. Joseph relying on those screens to really buff up the damage resistances, but that's what critical hits are there for, quite frankly. That's why these super bulky Pokemon can be dealt with. Otherwise, things would get kind of tough. But that is what you play for. You play to your outs if you are Taran. And if you're Joe, I don't know if you really need to change things up too much. I do think in that situation towards the end, there is a world where keeping Miraidon Electric Dragon, not going for the Terastallization, and just clicking Electro Drifts might be the way to go. But at the same time, nothing is guaranteed there. And these players are very good. So they probably know a little bit better than I do. So, going into game #2, I'm interested to see if we see any adjustments. We saw Taran go for the Whimsicott in the back previously, but we see the exact same leads from both players. When you have a game that's going pretty well, even if you end up losing it for Joe, having a similar game plan is not the worst thing in the world. We could see a very similar turn 1 to what we saw before. Taran just saying, okay, if you don't click the fake out, I get a really strong Dazzling Gleam off. Taran could also go for a fake out of his own this time. That could be big. Actually, we do see a change up in the back for Taran there. If you caught a quick glimpse of it, that's going to be pretty big. We see Taran's Iron Hands switch out. I'm pretty sure that guarantees that Joseph is keeping both Pokemon in, and we see the Farigiraf come on to the battlefield. That Electric Seed is going to proc, and the special defense boost is coming through the defense boost comes through for the Farigiraf. We're also seeing the Terastallization now for Taran into that Miraidon. So once again, we're hitting that Terra Fairy Dazzling Gleam, and there's going to be no fake out to stop it this time. If you're Joseph and you make the same play as last time, getting that Reflect setup is going to be nice, but you're not going to have the Light Screen up, and this Dazzling Gleam is going to do a lot of damage to both of your Pokemon. Fake out gets blocked due to the Armor Tail. Taran making the adjustment for this turn 1 play, but Joseph makes the call and puts up the Light Screen, so he's going to be able to maintain a little bit more of that damage resistance here. Dazzling Gleam is still going to do a decent chunk to both of these Pokemon, though. We saw it last time. Grimmsnarl goes down to about 20% HP, maybe a little bit less, and Iron Hands just above half. Miraidon is still going to be the fastest thing on the field. Dazzling Gleam is going to take out this Grimmsnarl. Taran retreats the Farigiraf, doesn't need to worry about any more priority moves, brings the Iron Hands back in. Joseph's going to be taking a lot of damage from this Dazzling Gleam here. Again, Farigiraf was also probably the slowest thing on the field. Joseph not going for any switch, or is going for a switch out on his own Iron Hands. That is going to be pretty big. You know that your Iron Hands is going to be slower in Trick Room if Taran sets that up, or at least slower in Trick Room than the Farigiraf. We see the Volcarona come out here. This is going to resist a Dazzling Gleam. As you know, on top of being a fire type, having that citrus berry, and being relatively bulky here, Grimmsnarl is going to go down. But again, if you're Joseph, you set up both screens. It's okay if Grimmsnarl goes down. You wouldn't mind it being on the field, so it can get a foul play off into the Iron Hands potentially. But with it going down, you have Volcarona on the field, and you get to bring out your own Iron Hands again to re-up fake out pressure. But again, Taran can just keep switching out, bringing the Giraffe back in, and keep clicking these Dazzling Gleams. It really doesn't mind it all that much. But we see Joseph bring in his own Miraidon here. Now, Joseph does have to be aware that Fake Out will hurt from this Iron Hands. Fake Out plus Dazzling Gleam is going to do a lot of work, and so Joseph does go for the Terastallization right off the bat here. Does not want to take a super effective Dazzling Gleam on his own Miraidon, so chances are Joseph knows that this Miraidon is not going to be moving this turn. It's a pretty free shot to go for a Quiver Dance for your Volcarona, but Miraidon is not going to get a chance to move. Fake Out comes through, Dazzling Gleam is going to hit. I'm interested to see what this Volcarona goes for. It could go for damage, or it could go for a buff. Speed boost here could be pretty big, but you might be a little bit worried about that Farigiraf in the back. Joseph goes for the Quiver Dance. So, special attack, special defense, and speed boost for this Volcarona here. This is where you want to start doing damage. With that special defense boost on top of the light screen, you're going to have a pretty good time overall. Being able to dish out some damage. Citrus Berry is almost about to proc. If you can get just a little bit more damage on that Volcarona, like if this Dazzling Gleam, like if Taran stays in and clicks Dazzling Gleam here, that should trigger the Citrus Berry, which Volcarona is going to feel very, very good about. Get a second chance, get a little bit of a second health bar here to stay on the field just a little bit longer. We do see Taran switch out the Iron Hands for the Ogerpon here. Moldbreaker is going to come through. This is what took out the Volcarona in the previous game. We do see Joseph's Miraidon move first here. Dazzling Gleam is going to come through. It's going to do a decent chunk to both. Yeah, Miraidon goes down to about a third of its HP. And we see Fiery Dance come through for Volcarona with a critical hit. I'm not sure if it would have mattered. That's something to potentially calc later, but the Miraidon goes down for Taran without getting another attack off. And that's another special attack boost for this Volcarona. That is absolutely huge for Joseph here. Volcarona is setting up for a massive, massive sweep. So, Volcarona doesn't want to take an Ivy Cudgel here. Really would like to avoid that. Can certainly go for a Protect. It doesn't want to get hit by a Fake Out. That could be pretty big. But if you're Joseph, you're under a point where you kind of want to click attacks with both, because if at least one of them gets an attack off, you're going to be feeling pretty darn good. Fiery Dance comes through. This is a +2 special attack Fiery Dance, and it's going into the Ogerpon slot, but it only takes it down to 2 HP. Ogerpon stays on the battlefield here. Ivy Cudgel is going to come through, but it's going into the Miraidon slot. That's going to take it down, but that's going to give Joseph an opportunity to bring his own Iron Hands onto the field. It is a 2v3 right now, but Joseph has a +3 Volcarona with a speed boost, and now the electric terrain disappears from the battlefield, and it's not coming back. So Taran's big damage dealer here, the Iron Hands, is not quite as much of a threat. Both players have Iron Hands. Pretty healthy, relatively healthy. Obviously, Terrence is feeling a little bit better. Ogerpon goes down to a Fake Out, but you can absolutely click Spiky Shield to mitigate that damage. But if you're Joseph, you're in a spot where you can just Fake Out into the Iron Hands and go for Fiery Dance into that Ogerpon slot, and at the very least the Iron Hands won't get to move, or it'll have to click a Fake Out of its own potentially if it outspeeds. And even if Taran switches out this Ogerpon, which is exactly what's happening, this Farigiraf is still going to take a ton of damage from this Fiery Dance. Farigiraf does have quite a lot of bulk. It's a pretty defensive Pokemon here, but Volcarona actually goes for a Giga Drain, heals itself back up to almost full, and Farigiraf goes down to half. We are not seeing any Fake Outs here from either Pokemon. Iron Hands might just be drain punching each other once again, which that's always a pretty interesting time. But I think at the end of it, Taran would win that out. And Taran goes for the low kick, and it's a critical hit. Joseph now, it's a Volcarona versus the world. 2 big crits for Taran Birdee in back-to-back games. But this is not over yet for Joseph. If Joseph can take out the Farigiraf, Iron Hands doesn't really have much to do against this Volcarona. It really can't do a lot. None of its attacks are going to do a ton of damage. Volcarona resists basically everything. And as long as Volcarona can consistently outspeed, which will happen if it takes out this Farigiraf, then I think Joseph should be able to clean it up. Fiery Dance comes through. I'm imagining this is targeting the Farigiraf. That's exactly what happens. Farigiraf goes down. This is going to give Taran an opportunity to go for another fake out here, but this Volcarona is just getting more and more impossible to deal with. So, Iron Hands comes out to play one last time, and now if you're Joseph, Joseph's Citrus Berry still hasn't triggered, which is absolutely huge. Again, a critical hit Ivy Cudgel could spell doom for Joseph here, but at the same time, Volcarona can just go for Protect. It won't have to deal with a Fake Out, and that should give Volcarona the opportunity to go for a Fiery Dance or a Giga Drain, whatever it wants to go for, into that Ogerpon spot. As long as Joseph can take out the Ogerpon, I think that's going to guarantee victory. Like I said, Drain Punch and Low Kick are both very resisted by the Volcarona. Reflect is still going to be up for a turn, and Volcarona can also just click Giga Drain into Iron Hands. The Assault Vest is huge, but this is a +4 special attack Volcarona. It is going to be doing massive work, and we see there just the list of not very effective, and not very effective into that Volcarona. So, Spiky Shield comes through for the Ogerpon again. That's, or for the Ogerpon here. That's going to be pretty big. Reflect will wear off on the next turn. Fiery Dance comes through into that Ogerpon slot. It is protected. I believe we are seeing a Drain Punch here from the Iron Hands. It does almost nothing. Iron Hands is going to get a little bit of a health boost, probably about 20 HP. That's, yeah, it's 13 in fact. And with the Reflect wearing off, that maybe gives Taran a little bit of an opening with a couple of critical hits and additional Spiky Shields. That's exactly what we see. 2 Spiky Shields in a row. We've been seeing a lot of double Protect type moves here, and it's been pretty big, but Fiery Dance once again into the Ogerpon. This, if you're Taran, you just have to keep hoping and praying that this will work out and that you can get a big critical hit. Maybe, hopefully before the Citrus Berry goes off, but we will have to see. And if you're Taran, this is just, you just keep clicking the same things. You just keep clicking them, but the Spiky Shield is finally going to fail. The Fiery Dance is going to take it out. And now there's going to be a +5. A +5 Volcarona. Ogerpon falls. If this Iron Hands gets a big crit here, this is what, like, this right here would be it. No. So that's going to trigger the Citrus Berry. Volcarona is going to get a nice bit of health to top it off. I mean, it is going to essentially be a full health Iron Hands, but finally with the Flame Body, that's the other chance. That's the other win condition for Joseph here. The Flame Body was inevitably going to trigger. Volcarona goes back above half HP. All that hard work is for naught. And now with this burn as well, Joseph can just, at the very least, infinitely click Giga Drain and will out-heal whatever Iron Hands is healing back and will inevitably win this game. So, for Taran, going into game number 3 here, this Volcarona is a pretty dangerous win condition for Joseph, but if Taran can take it down or potentially force Joseph into a position to have to sacrifice the Volcarona, then things are pretty rough. But at the same time, that game 1 felt really good other than that critical hit. Again, this Volcarona has kind of been the center of the action for Joe here in this matchup. So if you are Taran, figuring out a proper answer to it, Iron Hands isn't really it. But if you can maintain the health on your Ogerpon, that has a decent chance of dealing with it. You saw that in the previous game, especially through these light screens and reflects. There's also a world where maybe you want to try to take out that Grimmsnarl before it can get both reflect and light screen up. That has been really, really pivotal for Joseph here. And even though these endgame positions have been relatively narrow, the Reflect and Light Screen really have defined much of this matchup so far. So, Grimmsnarl and the Volcarona, if you are Taran, those are the big things that you are looking at of how to address. But you cannot forget that there is still a Ditto in the back for Joe. That being said, let's go ahead and dive into game number 3 here. We see Taran starting with the Farigiraf and the Miraidon, and Joseph starting with Iron Hands and Grimmsnarl once again. Fake Out, not an option here for Joe. Drain Punch, Heavy Slam, all of that is still alive and well here. For the Grimmsnarl, you have 2 special attackers that you're going to have to deal with. Lights, like, that screams Light Screen to me. But if you're Joe, are you worried about this Grimmsnarl going down to the Miraidon, even through a light screen? This Farigiraf on the field, Helping Hand. We know that Volt Switch does a ton into the Grimmsnarl. It doesn't quite KO it, but with a Helping Hand boost, it definitely should. Helping Hand comes through. Grimmsnarl does still have the Prankster ability. It should move next. The Light Screen comes up, but this Helping Hand, I imagine it's going to be a Helping Hand Volt Switch, should take out the Grimmsnarl. Yep, that is exactly what it's going to be. Grimmsnarl still survives even with the Helping Hand boost. This is a tanky Grimmsnarl. And that, I think Taran was planning on that being the win condition, getting that Grimmsnarl down, hoping that the Helping Hand would do it, but it just doesn't. This does put Grimmsnarl in a spot where Fake Out will take it out, but this Iron Hands now has to deal with a Volt Switch from its contender. It doesn't do very much, but that does give Joseph the opportunity to swap out. I'm interested to see what Joe brings in. We've seen Miraidon and Volcarona in the back both times, and we see the Miraidon once again. So, big damage threat on the side for Joe right now. Light Screen is up, but there is no Reflect. Iron Hands is on the field, and that could be the defining thing. If Taran can keep Grimmsnarl from setting up a Reflect, that could be the big deal. But Iron Hands does not do it. Miraidon instead takes the Fake Out, and Reflect still gets up. Grimmsnarl is staying on the field for one more turn, I believe, but we see the Trick Room now from Farigiraf alive and well. So speed control is now, or well, speed tiers are now flipped on their head. Iron Hands is almost certainly going to be the fastest thing on the field. Joe could go for Terastallization on the Miraidon here, although doesn't necessarily have to. If Joe does want to start clicking Dazzling Gleam, then that's certainly the way to go. But clicking Electro Drift is a strong move. Volt Switch is a strong move. They both do a ton of damage right now, and Miraidon isn't necessarily under any huge threat. That said, Joseph just doesn't want to deal with it, takes the Miraidon out of Trick Room, and brings in Volcarona here. Volcarona also feels pretty good in this position, resists everything that Iron Hands has to throw at it, especially with that Reflect up, and Farigiraf now gets to move relatively freely. Notably, Grimmsnarl is slower than the Farigiraf. Foul Play does get a bit off, but Psychic here into the into the Volcarona, it's not as resisted. It does a little bit more damage here, so this Volcarona a little bit lower than usual. And notably, Joseph doesn't get a free switch into this Grimmsnarl slot. That could be Taran's new win condition. Just leave this Grimmsnarl here, just let it hang out and be relatively useless. And that will allow Taran to kind of just focus one spot at a time. Right now, if Taran can take out this Volcarona, the endgame becomes a lot easier. Low kick comes through, but Taran says, you know what, get rid of the Grimmsnarl. It is out of here. So, Volcarona now. We've seen Quiver Dance come out the last few times, and that is what we see once again. So, that does heighten its speed. There are 2 turns of Trick Room left now. Or maybe there's 3. I'll be honest. I've been losing track of these turns really quick. So, special defense boost, pretty big. Makes it very bulky up against this Miraidon and the Farigiraf that's still on the field. Iron Hands comes out for Joe. Again, Joe needs to be aware of the Farigiraf in the back, but with this Ogerpon on the field, I don't know if Taran is going to want to switch that out. Maybe we'll switch out the Iron Hands, as Iron Hands cannot do a ton into the Volcarona, but there's a good chance that there are no swaps. Taran could just try to go for some outright damage here. That said, if you are Joe, you are probably going to have the second slowest or the slowest thing on the field, and a low kick or a drain punch could do, or mainly a low kick into that Iron Hand slot. Either way could do quite a bit of damage, as well as a drain punch. Your Volcarona now is in a spot where it's going to want to start clicking those fiery dances. You do have that speed boost, and once Trick Room goes down, that speed boost should stay. Ogerpon goes for the spiky shield, going for that defensive option here. I'm interested to see what the Volcarona goes for, and it is that Protect here. So Joseph taking some time, slowing things down, as well as Taran just lowering the tempo of the game. Taran's Iron Hands does move first in this matchup here. We see the Drain Punch come out of Joseph's Iron Hands into the Ogerpon and taking Iron Hands below half HP now. Electricity is going to disappear from the battlefield, so that is going to lower both Iron Hands attacks. But I'm very interested to see what the damage numbers are going to look like now. Volcarona cannot protect on this turn. Will the Citrus Berry come in huge? Again, Ivy Cudgel has another chance to crit here. We could see Taran get 3 big crits in 3 games. Game number 2, it didn't matter as much, or well, it didn't end up in a victory, but in game number 1, it certainly did. And we see Joseph, even though he got the Quiver Dance up, retreats the Volcarona. That's going to be a Miraidon coming back out onto the field. So, Miraidon makes another appearance. It's going to be taking any damage that the Volcarona would have taken instead. Joseph resetting the electric terrain to give both Iron Hands their Quark Drive boosts once more. So, And again, we're seeing really consistently here that Joseph's Iron Hands is activating its abilities first. That is a pretty clear tell that Joseph's Iron Hands is faster than Taran's. We do see the terrestrialization come through for Taran's Ogerpon here. This is going to boost the Ogerpon's attack stat and make this Ivy Cudgel even stronger in 2 separate ways. So this Miraidon, it does resist. It is going to resist this Ivy Cudgel, but this is still going to hurt. Low kick does a ton of damage into that Miraidon, even without a critical hit, even through the reflect. We see a wild charge come through for Joseph's Iron Hands here. It does a lot into the Ogerpon, but it doesn't do nearly enough to KO, but this Ivy Cudgel absolutely will. Miraidon is going down. Now Joseph is in a really tough spot. Is going to be able to bring the Volcarona back in, and Trick Room is gone, but Volcarona is not set up at all. There is no speed boost. There is no Quiver Dance boost of any type on this Volcarona. There's no opportunity to go for Fake Out on the Iron Hands, and Joe's Iron Hands is incredibly low. Taran right now has a phenomenal opportunity to just take out the Iron Hands. This Volcarona doesn't have any super effective moves to go into the Ogerpon here. I don't know if Fiery Dance is going to be able to take it out, and Taran can also just go for a low kick into the opposing Iron Hands. It's going to be moving second, but that should do enough damage. The Ivy Cudgel comes through, and Volcarona goes down. That attack boost plus the terrestrialization boost, we see a sigh of relief from Taran there. Ogerpon's going to fall to the Drain Punch, but it just doesn't matter anymore. Critical hit really doesn't matter, and we see Taran elated. That Volcarona was the #1 threat in the end game there, and with Taran being able to take it down with that sacrificial Ivy Cudgel from Ogerpon, that should lock up this game number 3 and send Taran Birdee into the top 4. That was a very exciting match. A lot of back and forth. There were some big crits, but there was we've had some previous matches where things have felt like, oh dang, Thunderwave paralysis, that feels pretty bad. Critical hits to reflect and light screen, that's what they're designed for. That's what the intention is, right? That is how that game rolls. But that wasn't even critical hits. That was Taran with a good call, terrestrializing the Ogerpon, getting that maximum damage through onto that Volcarona. And once you take down that threat, that is it. So Taran Birdee moving on to the top 4. We have 3 more top 8 matches that we're going to end up covering in videos today, so keep an eye out for those. Until next time, be safe, be smart, make wise decisions, and farewell.